The apartment had become a tomb, and Ivy was the ghost haunting it. 3 weeks had passed since the breakup, though it felt like months, time moving thick and slow, the kind of painful slowness that makes each hour feel like a day. She moved through the small two-bedroom apartment like a shadow, careful not to occupy the same spaces too long, as if her sadness was contagion that might spread to the walls themselves. Her roommate, Riley, had tried everything. Invitations to wine nights, offers to cook her favorite meals, suggestions for movies and concerts, and spontaneous road trips. All of it met with polite refusals and those heartbreaking short sentences that had become Ivy's trademark. Not today. I'm tired. Maybe later. The words were keys that locked Riley out, no matter how desperately she wanted in. The worst part wasn't the crying, that had stopped a week ago. The worst part was the nothing. The void where joy used to live. Ivy avoided mirrors. She'd caught her reflection once by accident, unguarded in the hallway, and barely recognized herself. Her fox-red hair hung limp around her face. Her green eyes, usually bright with mischief, had gone dull and distant. She looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and extracted all the best parts of her. The relationship with Marcus had been complicated, passionate, and volatile, the kind of love that burned bright and hot and ultimately consumed itself. They'd met at a gallery opening 3 years ago. He'd been standing in front of a painting, and she'd made some sarcastic comment about his serious expression. He'd laughed, and that laugh had been the beginning of everything. For 2 years, they'd been inseparable, the kind of couple that finished each other's sentences and made love like they were drowning, and each other was air. But then something shifted. Subtle at first. Missed dinners, vague explanations, the way his phone would buzz and he'd turn away to answer it. She'd ignore the red flags because ignoring them was easier than facing what they might mean. Until she couldn't ignore them anymore. Until she found the messages. Until she saw the photos. Ivy hadn't confronted him. She'd simply packed a bag and come to stay with Riley indefinitely. Marcus had called and texted for days, but she let every attempt go unanswered. Words felt dangerous. Words meant she'd have to process it, and processing it meant admitting that the love she believed in, the future she'd imagined, all of it had been a lie. So she'd chosen silence instead. Chosen absence over confrontation. Riley tried a different approach on day 23. She knocked softly on Ivy's bedroom door, the door that had been closed for most of the day. "Hey," she called out, keeping her voice light. "I'm making pasta. Your kind. With the garlic and white wine sauce you love." There was a long pause. Then, not hungry, Riley stood outside the door for another moment, hands still raised, about to knock again. She could smell Ivy's sadness through the wood. It was oddly chemical, sharp and acrid, mixing with the stale air of a room that had been closed up too long. She wanted to push the door open, gather Ivy in her arms, shake her until the light came back to her eyes. Instead, she turned away. That evening, Riley sat on the living room floor with her dinner, a glass of wine beside her, surrounded by boxes she'd brought up from storage. She was looking for winter decorations, or at least that's what she told herself. Really, she was looking for anything that might break through the weight that had settled over their home. As she worked through the boxes, pulling out strings of lights and old ornaments, she forgot about time. She forgot that Ivy was upstairs, locked away. She was focused on finding something, though she didn't know what. Then her hand hit something solid, something wooden and small, wrapped in faded tissue paper. When she unwrapped it, she couldn't help but smile. It was a tiny mechanical toy fox, no more than 4 inches tall, with intricate joints and wind-up gears visible through its transparent belly. It was painted in shades of copper and rust, with emerald eyes that gleamed under the light. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but what made Riley smile was its expression. Its face was frozen in what could only be described as absolute comedic panic. She wound it up, her curiosity piqued. What happened next was pure, unbridled disaster. The little fox took exactly 2 steps before its mechanical legs tangled beneath it. It stumbled spectacularly, regained its footing, took another step, and immediately fell again, its tiny metal body clattering against the hardwood floor. The motion was so perfectly, ridiculously clumsy that Riley burst out laughing, watching as the toy continued its futile attempts at locomotion, each step accompanied by a soft clicking and whirring. She was so absorbed in this small moment of unexpected comedy that she didn't notice Ivy at the top of the stairs. Her roommate stood in shadow, watching. And for the first time in 3 weeks, something flickered across her face, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, barely perceptible. But it was there. Ivy told herself she was just checking on the noise. That was the lie she clung to as she descended the stairs, her socked feet silent on the wood. Riley was so focused on the toy that she didn't notice her approach, which gave Ivy a moment to observe before being observed. Her roommate looked genuinely happy in a way Ivy hadn't seen in weeks. The happiness had been drained from both of them. Riley's eyes were bright, her shoulders relaxed, her whole body animated by something simple and small and absolutely ridiculous. The mechanical fox was attempting its journey again, Riley having wound it up a second time. This time, Ivy watched it stumble and fall, with the absolute determination of something with no concept of its own limitations. It was profound in its failure, in its refusal to learn. Something sharp and sudden twisted in Ivy's chest. It wasn't pain, or rather, it was a different kind of pain. The kind that comes before laughter. What is that? Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rough from disuse, smaller than she remembered. Riley's head snapped up, and Ivy watched surprise bloom across her features. Then, carefully, something softer. I have no idea, Riley said, and she was smiling, genuinely smiling at Ivy, not at her, but with her. I found it in the storage boxes. It's possibly the worst designed toy ever created, but I can't stop watching it fail. The fox was making another attempt. Step, step, collapse. Step, step, collapse. An endless cycle of optimistic failure. Ivy found herself walking closer. She sank down onto the floor beside Riley, their shoulders nearly touching. The mechanical toy continued its performance, oblivious to its audience, driven by nothing but gears and springs and the unwavering commitment to move forward, regardless of how many times it fell. It's like it doesn't understand that it's broken, Ivy said quietly. Or maybe it doesn't care, Riley replied. Maybe it just keeps going because that's what it does. Ivy watched the tiny fox take another tumbling step, then another. And something inside her, something that had been locked away for 3 weeks, cracked open just slightly. A sound emerged from her chest, barely a sound at all. Almost a cough, almost a breath. But Riley heard it. Did you just? Don't, Ivy said, but there was no force behind it. The sound came again, genuine this time. A soft chuckle, the kind that emerges when you're trying to suppress a laugh and failing. It felt foreign on her lips, like she'd forgotten how to make that shape, and yet it also felt like coming home. Riley laughed too, a full and delighted sound. She reached over and squeezed Ivy's hand, and Ivy didn't pull away. Over the next 3 days, the mechanical fox became their project. Riley created an elaborate training course in the living room, stacking books to create obstacles, laying out a tape line on the floor to mark a finish line, narrating the toy's efforts in increasingly dramatic voices as it stumbled through its chaotic journey. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley announced in a faux serious tone, as the fox approached a particularly challenging book stack, we're looking at a 20-degree incline. The competitor is undaunted. The competitor is on its side. Ivy watched from the couch, and then she started coaching along. Come on, little guy. You've got this. Believe in yourself. And when the fox inevitably failed, she'd add an encouragement. That was just practice. Everyone falls the first time. On the second night, after the toy had completed its obstacles in record terrible time, Ivy moved to the floor beside Riley. They sat cross-legged, facing each other, the mechanical fox still on the ground between them, twitching occasionally as it wound down. Thank you, Ivy said. Her voice was still hoarse, but it was there, real and present in the apartment for the first time in weeks. Riley's eyes glistened. For what? Finding a broken toy. For not giving up on me, Ivy said. I don't know. When I was gone, Riley reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Ivy's face. It was a tender gesture, the kind that had become rare in their dynamic. Usually, they were more comfortable with sarcasm and distance, but something had shifted. I wasn't going anywhere, Riley said softly. I knew you'd come back eventually. I just had to figure out what would bring you back faster. Ivy smiled, a real smile, not the small, pained expression she'd been managing. A mechanically incompetent toy fox. Hey, Riley said, feigning offense. This toy is a genius. It's a metaphor. It's performing a sacred function. It's performing a spectacular failure, Ivy countered, but she was laughing now. laughing in a way that felt like standing in sunshine after weeks of rain. Riley leaned closer, and for a moment, Ivy thought her roommate might kiss her. The air between them seemed to pause, pregnant with possibility. But Riley just smiled and tucked another strand of hair behind Ivy's ear, a gesture that somehow felt more intimate than a kiss might have been. "Come on," Riley said, standing and extending a hand. "I made your favorite dinner. The pasta. I'm betting you're actually hungry now." Ivy took her hand, allowing herself to be pulled up. As they moved toward the kitchen, she glanced back at the toy fox, still resting on the floor. Tomorrow they could wind it up again. Tomorrow they could watch it fail and laugh together. But tonight she was ready for something more. She was ready to rejoin the world. The next week brought changes, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Ivy started showering regularly again, leaving her room during daylight hours, engaging in conversations that lasted longer than a single sentence. The dullness in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something approaching their old brightness. But more than anything, there was laughter. Constant, surprising, spontaneous laughter. Riley had downloaded a video of other wind-up toys failing spectacularly, and they'd watched these videos together, creating an ongoing commentary. Ivy had started giving the mechanical fox a personality. She called it Persistent Pete, and she'd narrate its interior monologue in an overly earnest voice while Riley provided the sound effects. "Pete believes today is the day," Ivy would intone dramatically as Riley positioned the toy at the starting line. "Today, Pete will not fall. Today, Pete will... Oh, Pete has fallen immediately. Pete is undeterred," Riley would continue. "Pete has never let failure stop him before. It was silly. It was childish. It was exactly what Ivy needed." On the 10th day, Riley came home with takeout, Indian food, the kind with the naan bread that Ivy had been craving, and found Ivy on the couch, sketching. She was drawing the mechanical fox, but in the drawing, Pete was standing triumphantly atop a mountain, arms raised in victory, while a crowd of admiring animals cheered below. "Oh my God," Riley said, setting down the food. "Is Pete famous now?" "Pete is always famous," Ivy said, not looking up from her sketch. "In Pete's mind, Pete has already won. Pete's failure is merely performance art." Riley sat beside her, close enough that their legs touched. "When did you become so obsessed with Pete?" Ivy finally looked at Riley. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been in weeks, but there was something else there too, something warm and searching. "When I realized Pete was basically a metaphor for my life," she said quietly. "Falls a lot. Keeps trying anyway. Eventually, something will work out." "See," Riley said, and there was a note of triumph in her voice. "I told you. The fox is a genius." "You're a genius," Ivy said. Riley's breath caught. They were sitting very close now, closer than was strictly necessary for having a conversation. Close enough that Ivy could see the flecks of gold in Riley's brown eyes, close enough to count the light freckles across her nose. "I did the bare minimum," Riley said, her voice dropping. "I found a toy and—" "No," Ivy interrupted. "You did so much more than that. You saw me lost, and instead of forcing me out, you found a way to make me want to come back. You met me where I was and gave me a reason to move forward." Riley's hand found Ivy's on the couch. Their fingers intertwined slowly, tentatively, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter if they moved too quickly. "I couldn't force you," Riley said, "but I could sit with you. I could be here." Ivy leaned forward, closing the distance between them. It was a movement she'd thought about for years, since the first day Riley had moved in, actually, if she was being honest with herself. But she'd been with Marcus. She'd been comfortably numb. It wasn't until everything had fallen apart that she realized what she'd been missing. Riley met her halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters of this new territory. Then Ivy deepened it, her hand moving to Riley's jaw, her fingers sliding into the soft hair at the back of Riley's neck. Riley responded by pulling her closer, one hand on Ivy's waist, the other cradling the back of her head. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, Riley rested her forehead against Ivy's. "I've wanted to do that for a really long time," Riley whispered. "How long?" Ivy asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. "Since you moved in. Since the day you made that comment about my too serious art in the living room." Riley pulled back just enough to look at Ivy. "But you were happy with him, and he seemed to make you happy, so I just waited." I thought maybe it would pass. It never passed, Ivy asked. Riley shook her head. Not for a second. Ivy kissed her again, longer this time, with more certainty. And as Riley's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, Ivy realized something profound. Heartbreak hadn't destroyed her. It had freed her. It had burned away the things that were keeping her from herself, from the person she was meant to become. The mechanical fox lay abandoned on the floor, having tipped over sometime during their kiss. But Ivy didn't feel the need to right it. Some things she was learning were beautiful precisely because they fell. The next morning, Ivy woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. She was in Riley's room, in Riley's bed, wrapped in Riley's arms. The events of the previous night came back to her in fragments, kisses that had led to the couch, which had led to the bedroom, where they'd slowly undressed each other, mapping out new territory with careful hands and whispered words. It had been tender and urgent at the same time, full of the kind of careful attention that came from genuinely wanting to know someone. There had been a moment when Riley was above her that Ivy had felt something release in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying for months finally loosening. Riley was still asleep, her face peaceful, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Ivy allowed herself a moment to just look at her, to marvel at the fact that she'd somehow missed Riley, while she'd been so focused on Marcus. Or maybe she hadn't missed it at all. Maybe she'd just been too afraid to acknowledge what was right in front of her. When Riley woke, she didn't reach for words. She just smiled and kissed Ivy softly, a morning breath kind of kiss that somehow felt more intimate than the passionate ones from the night before. Hi, Riley said. Hi yourself, Ivy replied. They stayed in bed longer than they should have talking. Riley told her about the moment she'd first realized her feelings were more than just roommate affection. It had been 3 months in, when Ivy had come home from a particularly bad day with Marcus and had cried on Riley's shoulder. I remember thinking, Riley said, her fingers tracing patterns on Ivy's arm, that I'd never let you cry over anyone again if I had any say in it. Ivy told Riley about her fears, the fear that this was a rebound, that she was seeking safety because she was hurt. What if I'm just broken right now, and you're the person picking up the pieces? She asked. Then I'll pick them up, Riley said simply. And we'll figure out what you look like put back together. We do that together. When they finally left the bedroom, it was to find the mechanical fox still on the living room floor where it had fallen the night before. Riley picked it up and wounded it, and they watched it tumble through its routine. But something had changed. Ivy didn't just see failure anymore. She saw persistence. She saw something that knew what it was and did it anyway, despite the odds. Over the next 2 weeks, Ivy continued to heal. She packed up the last of Marcus's things and arranged for him to pick them up. The conversation was brief and businesslike, no accusations, no explanations. They had wanted different things, and that was enough. It was sad, but it wasn't devastating anymore. She started leaving the apartment again, going to the coffee shop down the street, visiting the gym. She met an old friend for brunch and was surprised to find herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. The world hadn't changed, but somehow she had. She'd made space in her life for joy, and now that space was filling up with small good things. And there was Riley. Riley, who'd become not just her roommate, but her anchor. They spent nights tangled together in bed, talking until late. They cooked breakfast together on Saturday mornings, and Riley would do this thing where she'd steal bites of Ivy's toast, and Ivy would pretend to be annoyed while secretly delighting in it. They'd started making plans, real plans, not vague someday plans, but actual arrangements to go hiking next month, to visit Riley's parents the following weekend. One evening, Ivy and Riley were sitting on the couch, the mechanical fox perched on the coffee table between them. Ivy was scrolling through her phone when she came across a video of the artist who'd made it, a craftsman in Portland who specialized in intricate mechanical toys. Look, she said, showing Riley. This person makes Pete on purpose. Like, they intentionally designed toys that are hilariously clumsy. Riley laughed. So, Pete isn't a failed design. Pete is an artistic statement. Pete is exactly what Pete was meant to be, Ivy said. She set the phone down and looked at Riley. You know what I realized? Pete doesn't fail because Pete is broken. Pete fails because that's Pete's purpose. Pete's job is to fall down and get back up and fall down again. And Pete does it so well. Are you still talking about the toy? Riley asked, amusement dancing in her eyes. Maybe I'm talking about me, Ivy said. I spent so long thinking I had to be something I wasn't. With Marcus, I was trying to be the kind of person who fit into his life. But I was so busy trying to fit that I couldn't see what was right next to me. Riley reached over and took her hand. And what's right next to you now? Ivy squeezed her fingers. Everything I actually need. 1 month later, on a Saturday morning, Ivy stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked bad, she looked better than she had in years, actually. But because the person looking back at her was someone she recognized. The brightness in her eyes had fully returned. There was color in her cheeks, a slight smile playing at her lips. She got her hair trimmed, the bright red tamed into a sharp, modern cut. She'd started wearing the clothes she loved again, things that made her feel like herself. And perhaps most importantly, she'd stopped hiding. Riley knocked on the bathroom door. "You've been in here for 20 minutes. I'm starting to get concerned." Just admiring myself, Ivy called back, opening the door. "Is that vain?" Riley pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "It's healthy. You're allowed to like looking at yourself." "I'm allowed to like a lot of things now," Ivy said. She'd been thinking about this a lot, about the strange gift of heartbreak. It had destroyed something in her, yes, but it had also cleared space for something better to grow. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity. Riley made pancakes while Ivy set the table. They ate together, reading sections of the newspaper out loud to each other, laughing at bad headlines and making up increasingly ridiculous captions. Around noon, a package arrived. It was from Ivy's sister, a gift she'd mentioned wanting weeks ago. Inside was a set of watercolor paints, an expensive, thick watercolor paper. Ivy set them up in her room, which she'd officially converted into a studio space. She'd been sketching obsessively since the breakup, using art as a way to process her feelings. Now she wanted to try painting again, something she'd abandoned years ago. "Can I watch?" Riley asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. "Only if you stay quiet," Ivy said, but she was smiling. Art requires a certain kind of presence. Riley settled into a chair in the corner, her tea cradled between her hands, and watched as Ivy mixed colors and began to paint. What emerged slowly was a garden, wild and untended, full of flowers in various stages of bloom and decay. There was something alive about it, something that seemed to breathe on the canvas. "Is this how you see things now?" Riley asked softly, as Ivy added the final touches. "Like, is this what healing looks like from the inside?" Ivy stepped back, considering her work. The garden was beautiful, but it was also honest. Some of the flowers were withering. Some of the colors were muddy. But they were all growing together, all part of the same earth and the same light. "I think healing looks like acknowledging that you can be broken and beautiful at the same time," Ivy said. She turned to Riley. "I think it looks like being willing to fall down and get back up over and over without feeling like a failure every time you fall." Riley set down her tea and wrapped her arms around Ivy from behind, resting her chin on Ivy's shoulder. "I'm really glad you came back," she said quietly. "I'm really glad you waited for me," Ivy replied. That evening, they had dinner with friends, the first time Ivy had socialized since the breakup in any serious way. She found herself laughing genuinely, contributing to conversations, being present in a way she hadn't been in months. Her friend Sarah commented on it. "You seem different." "Lighter." "I am lighter," Ivy said, and she meant it. Later, as they walked home through the cool night air, Ivy thought about the mechanical fox. It was still on their coffee table, a monument to the exact moment when things had started to change. Tomorrow, she might start a series of paintings based on it. She might make it into something larger, something that captured that feeling, the moment when something broken becomes beautiful because it refuses to stop trying. Back at the apartment, Riley pulled out the wine they'd been saving and lit candles in the living room. It was something they did now. Friday and Saturday nights were theirs, dedicated to being present with each other. They put on music, soft and slow, and they danced together in the small space between the couch and the window. Tonight, as Ivy swayed in Riley's arms, her head resting against Riley's shoulder, she felt something that she could only describe as complete. Not because everything was perfect. Nothing would ever be perfect. But because she was present fully for the first time in a long time. She was here, in this moment, with this person, grateful for the broken toy and the broken heart and the strange alchemy of how the two had combined to create something whole. Riley kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" "How I'm probably going to dedicate my entire art series to that stupid mechanical fox," Ivy said. And how okay I am with that. Riley laughed, a sound that Ivy had come to love more than almost anything. Pete would be so proud. Later, when they were in bed together, wrapped around each other in the dark, Riley asked, "Do you ever think about Marcus anymore?" Ivy considered the question honestly. Sometimes. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It's like remembering a dream you had once. It felt real and important while you were in it. But when you wake up, you realize it was never the life you were actually living. And what life are you living now? Riley asked softly. Ivy turned to face her in the darkness. She could barely see Riley's features, but she could feel her presence warm and solid beside her. One where I fall down a lot, she said. But one where I have someone to help me back up. One where broken things become beautiful. One where a terrible mechanical toy can change everything. Riley kissed her then, and Ivy kissed back, and for the 100th time since that night when she'd come downstairs to find Riley laughing at Pete's spectacular failures, she marveled at how close she'd come to missing this. Missing Riley. Missing herself. But she hadn't missed it. And now, in the darkness, wrapped in the warmth of someone who loved her, Ivy finally understood what her painting had been trying to tell her all along. Healing wasn't about becoming whole again. It was about accepting all your broken pieces and finding someone willing to stand with you among the fragments. It was about saying yes to the small, silly moments that remind you why being alive is worth it. It was about that mechanical fox, stumbling forward, falling over and over again, never questioning whether it should keep trying. It was about love, messy, unexpected, transformative love, finding you when you least expect it. And for the first time since her heart had shattered, Ivy wasn't just surviving the wreckage. She was building something new from it. Something that was authentically hers. Something that made her laugh.